what is the value of learning violence? Well, I would say it's the same reason that all parents train their kids to swim. When you ask parents, you go, oh, you train your kid to swim. Yeah. Oh, so you want to be like Michael Phelps. I'm like, no, I don't want him to drown.
Welcome to the Tim Larkin interview on the Tucker Max Experiences. Tim Larkin's been a buddy of mine for about a decade, I think, and I've seen him really grow and expand his business and done amazing things in sort of the self-defense space. And he is my go-to guy. Like whenever I want to know anything about guns, violence, the industry, who do I talk to, who's legit, who's not, how do I think about this? How do I get to someone, get in contact with someone? He's the guy, right? He's the guy that I go to. He is a great friend. But more importantly, I think he has a view on violence that is, I'll be honest, pre-COVID, I was like, Tim, man, like, I get it. I get everything you say, but like, we live in America, man. Like, stop. Like, no one's going to shake me in prison. Right? Like, I don't live in prison. And so I thought he was a little over intense about violence. Accurate, amazing, knew his stuff, but it's like, I don't live in this world, Tim. And then maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But COVID happened, the BLM Antifa riots happened, and shit's gone off the rails, even worse since. And so here we are. And so I was like, all right, Tim, we need to talk. And he's really the one that's helped me wrap my head around it's not just self-defense, but violence, and understand how to think about violence, who to work with, who to talk to, everything. So that's what I tried to get out of him in this interview, is sort of the gist of what he's taught me and what can help you, I think, moving forward. I think we're going into a chaotic, violent time, at least for a period. And if you aren't ready, it might take you by surprise. Hopefully this interview will help you get ready.
I've known you for years and years and years, like, I don't know, 8 years or something like that.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, right. We've known each other for a long time. And here's the reality, and I know you know this, but like, I want the listeners to know too. So, your thing's always been teaching people how to deal with violence, understand violence, all that kind of stuff. And like, for most of the time I knew you, I'm like, yeah, this is cool. Like, Tim definitely knows stuff, and this is cool. But like, unconsciously, at least subconsciously, I'm like, I'm American. I live in America. It's safe here. Like, yeah, Tim's like, okay, if you go to prison, like, if I commit a felony and I'm going to prison, I really need to start training with Tim for a while or something. Or it's like I'm going to war, or I'm going to travel the world by myself. But I'm like, man, like, his stuff's cool. But like, and also, I've trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like, I can handle myself in a fight. Like, and it's America. Like, what's the worst that could happen, right? And I'll be honest, I think my perspective was pretty rational pre-COVID. Like, it might not have been the smartest position, but it made sense, right?
Yeah.
And it works. Like, I've never had any sort of incident. There was a Eurotrash dude who tried to push me once, and I knocked him clean out. And that was it. That was the violence I've had in my life last, like, 15 years.
Right.
And then COVID happens, and then, the summer of 2020 and all the BLM riots, and things have just gone sideways. And I realized, oh, that period is over. Like, to the extent that America was really totally safe, whether that was true or not, whether it's an illusion that's over or the reality of it is over, it doesn't matter, because it's over. Right? And it is time for me to, like, hey, Tim, about that violence stuff.
Right.
Can we talk a little bit more about that? And so then, like, obviously, we talked, and you referred me to Bill Rapier, who was awesome. And Rapier, like, I have a whole different section about this, but Rapier totally changed my perspective on concealed carry and a fighting system and all that. And then like, through you, I kind of met the SciOg guys and I was like, oh, these dudes are, these dudes are amazing. I don't even know if I've told you, I'm training with Jake Patterson, who's one of Harley Elmore's full instructors, so which is like a black belt in SciOg, is dude, they're all badasses, but like this dude is like, he's just like a random cop, but then also a total badass.
Yeah.
Like,
well, you're lucky where you live because you got a good group of guys down there.
So training SciOg Kali now, and then doing gun stuff. Obviously, I learned a lot from Tim Kennedy, but I also now train Clay Martin. And so like, you've been my go-to for who do I listen to? Who are the best people? Who makes sense? Who can I learn from? Right. And so what I wanted to do was introduce, because this whole piece is essentially adopting a defensive mindset and then learning, like going from there. Right.
Okay.
So let's start at the beginning. So, let's say I'm me 3 years ago. Right. So, I think I know a little bit, but the reality is I don't really, like, in a weird way, I might have been behind 3 years ago, someone who's coming in with nothing, because 3 years ago, I was like a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, okay, I can handle myself in a fight. Well, maybe without weapons and against one dude.
Right.
And so like, I actually may have been a disadvantage 3 years ago without knowing it. But so let's say I'm coming in, I don't really know anything except I don't know how to defend myself and I need to get better. Where do I start? Like, if I'm coming to you like, Tim, I'm a cup, I'm open, fill me up. Where are you starting with?
Yeah, I think first you gotta wrap your head around why you'd even look at it. So I mean that's part of the issue, because most people have a really the reason it was hard for you to kind of grasp that and cling to what is essentially very true. We live in if you live in the U.S., you know how to navigate towns, you know how to navigate, and avoid violence for the most part. And so the stuff that you get involved with is unpleasant social, antisocial, behavior, which you can navigate usually. But that's why the people that come to me, it's always interesting. The reason I try to do, speeches and the reason I write the books, and the reason I do all this stuff is because of my client makeup. 70% of the people come to me after the fact, and they all say the same thing. They say the exact same shit you tell me, is that, never had a fight in my life. I know all the right people. I live in the right neighborhoods. And then an act of violence happens and their whole life is turned upside down. Or an act of violence has happened to somebody else, something unthinkable. And they're like, oh my God, and they just realized I don't have anything in the toolbox for this. Yeah. And I've always found that to be fascinating. So I think the reason we have a problem with it, we as, normal citizens have a problem, is because we live, especially in the U.S., live in such a legalistic society. That's the first go-to that everybody goes to is, well, what about this or this,
What about the cops? I'm going to sue you.
Yeah. And those are very relevant, but those are only relevant if the context isn't clearly defined. So what I teach and the manner that I teach for is, I'm very clear. Everything I teach is about putting trauma in the human body, shutting down the CNS. When you
hold on, because I'm assuming most of the listeners of this don't speak violence.
Okay.
CNS is central nervous system.
Central nervous system. So basically you want to shut up. The thing that makes somebody dangerous is an active brain, their ability to think. That's mostly, we have to understand the thing that makes humans dangerous is not the fact that we're the biggest, fastest, strongest species.
Right.
It's that we have an active human brain and we're able to create tools. We're able to hunt in packs. Right. We're really good apex predators when it comes to that. And we're really good at doing violence against each other. I mean, we are descendants. We're descendants of people who were really good at using the tool of violence. Okay. And so a lot of stuff is inherently in us. The problem is we got so good at violence, especially our society got so good at violence that we don't think there's a need for it anymore. And, that's just it. When you go to other countries, it's a much easier sell for me to go to other countries and teach people. They don't have any other questions, but the context in which you have to put everything in, I'm just going to lay this overall for everybody, is anything that I'm about to talk about has this assumption. The assumption is that you are devoid of choice, meaning if you could have talked your way out of the situation, you would have. If you could have left the situation, you could have. Any social skills that you would have used are no longer relevant. And you're facing imminent violence, imminent grievous bodily harm. Somebody's going to come in and they're going to use violence on you. And so the only thing that is going to get you out of that is understanding how to use violence. And I'm very specific about saying violence rather than fighting.
Right.
Fighting is just really an imperfect, very vague term. But the threat level is such, any of the information I'm about to talk about, the threat level is such that if you had access to a firearm, you would feel completely justified emptying that firearm into the threat or threats.
Right.
That are there. So it's that level. So it's very, so when people sit there and talk about the legalistic or, okay, let's just put it what we're talking about. We're not talking about some guy pisses you off at a bar and makes fun of you and your ego is hurt and you feel you have to, kick his ass, quote unquote.
Right. Right.
Those are two things. And so the two things people have to understand is all the things that you need to respond to, with violence, and more importantly, all the things that you don't need to respond to. But that's your first sift and sort that you have to do. And really, it comes down.
What do you mean? Hold on. What
it comes down to, people always ask, when would I ever use this information? So this is the first part. This is like before they even want to train.
I don't think anyone's asking that in America anymore. Are they?
Yeah, they are.
Really?
Oh yeah. People talk.
Even now?
People. It's amazing.
Man, if you're still asking those questions, you're not going to make it.
Well, no, that's there are a ton of people that truly don't understand, what's happened.
I got. So, let's leave those people aside. The ones watching this,
they know. They're ready.
Yeah, they understand. Okay, I need to, at a minimum, I need to understand. I need to have a relationship with violence. Understand how to use it. If necessary, all that kind of stuff, right? So we're past the should I do this stage, right? If you're watching this.
Right.
All right. So then start there. Okay. I know I might need this one day. What do I do?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to sit there and ask yourself why you're training. What are you training for? Meaning,
right.
That's just where a lot of people get confused. Are you training for competition or are you training for destruction? Competition is awesome. It's fun. Any of the competitive combat sports. And what do I mean by that? I mean, anything that gamifies violence. And how do you gamify violence? There's only one way to
MMA, boxing, anything like that.
Yeah. And there's only one way to gamify violence, meaning have a competition. And that's to literally take out direct injury to the human body. Because if you did that, there'd be no competition. Meaning, if you crush the
you'd be killing somebody like that. Of course.
Yeah, and there's no place for that in competition.
Right.
But the illusion is that that's the gold standard. And the problem is, people have to understand, those events, they're fantastic. Those athletes are amazing. But they're predetermined. Everybody knows what's about to go on. Everybody's agreed upon the rules. You've got somebody in there to take care of the rules. And, it's weight classes, all those things. None of that exists when it comes to violence.
No.
As a matter of fact, a predator is going to seek you out because you don't seem to be a threat. If somebody's coming after you, it's because they see you as somebody that they can easily take out. Because they're not looking for a opportunity.
They're not looking for fairness. There's no criminals who are like, I gotta rob someone who has a gun. I gotta give him a chance.
No. You're an ends to the meat. And so you have to look at the subject very differently. I mean, prior to me understanding how to use violence, I had 3 different, multi-level black belts, and two in Korean arts, 1 in judo. And, it was great, and it served me very well on a lot of things. The first time I saw somebody use violence was the first time I really saw violence was my uncle in Boston. He had a guy lying on his car, I was 6 years old. He took me from the barber shop, and you know, he's coming back, and he was dressed. My uncle was a Irish, you know, his dad was a Southie, and so, you know, they just grew up fighting. They know how to fight. Really, really. But he takes me into the car. He takes me towards the car. Some two punks are lying on his car, you know, just smoking outside. And he just calmly says to him, "Hey, it's my car. Get out." They go, "What the fuck are you going to do, old man?" And he wasn't old. He's probably like 37, you know. And my uncle just looks at me and goes, "Tim, stay here." And he just walks over to the guy real calmly. He freaking throats the guy, grabs the back of his head, bangs it 5 times on the thing, looking at the other kid the whole time. The other kid freaking takes off, drops this kid in a bleeding mess off to the, you know, curb, opens the door for me, puts me in the back car, gets in and drives away. Looks back at me and says, "Hey, don't tell your mother about this." And so I'm 6 years old, and I'm just like, holy shit, you know, like it was awesome. You know, you're a little kid, and, you know, I grew up comfortable with that type of violence. You know, that's kind of what my family was. And, you know, my grandfather taught me boxing when I was like 4 years old, you know, started to do that. That, to me, it has nothing to do with competition. There was no warning. He just took the guy out right away. And that, to me, was always striking to me, because every time I started to learn a combat sport or a martial art, when I started getting into it, there were rules.
There's artificial. There's a level of artificiality.
And people are going to please, I hope people understand, this is not denigrating combat sports. It's just the idea that I couldn't see the disconnect. Whenever I saw violence, it was sudden, it was just horrific, and it was on right away. And it was deliberate intent to hurt somebody. Competition was deliberate intent to, you know, to win, have better skill sets, you know, and win, not to take the guy out or really to hurt him. My grandfather said that all the time. My grandfather would teach us in the basement of his Boston house, and we would sit there and we'd box. Me and my cousins would box as little kids, and he loved it. He loved the boxing. He loved the rules. He'd tell us stories about all the great boxers. But I remember every so often he'd stop and he'd point to the basement window, and he'd go, "Hey, listen, boys, this is what we do in the ring. You always have the rules, but out there," and he point out there, he goes, "Anybody tries to touch you," he goes, "Here's what you do." One of his favorite things was he loved to punch somebody in the bladder, which is right above your groin area. And the reason he liked that was because he knew people were going to cover their groin. And when they cover their groin, it highlights where the bladder is. And he dropped down 45 degrees. He knocked them in there because it worked really good close in. Guy would go down, come up, and then you had his neck, you had anything you wanted after that. And so he would teach things like that. So what was interesting was every time we went from sport, and then whoever the sport instructor was would talk about reality. And doing it out there, they always talked about some form of injury to the human body, direct injury to the human body. That was kind of like the Rosetta Stone that was in these guys' heads. They weren't there to try to better a guy, submit him, or do anything. They were there, okay, what parts of the human body cannot be protected, cannot take trauma, and how do you get a result?
How do you attack those parts?
Yeah, and it was very straightforward violence. It's as old as man. I mean, this is what we've done all our lives. You know, I mean, human history is basically some variation of this. The reason it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it is because we have a sense of fairness. You know, for most, if you're a good person, you have some sort of sense of fairness. And so what you want is something called self-defense. You know, I don't want to learn how to do the violence. I want to learn how to do the anti-violence. So
but you can't separate those, right? That's one of your big things, is you can't separate.
Well, there's
no such violence starts.
Yeah, there's only violence. There's no such thing as self-defense. Self-defense is a term after violence. So everybody first has to understand that when you are putting your hands on somebody, that is an act of violence, and you have no idea how it's going to turn out. Now, after the fact, it's going to be determined whether or not it was justified or it was criminal. If it was justified, it'll be determined self-defense. You get a pass on that. If it was criminal, well, you're going to have to deal with the system at that point. the disconnect that people have is they think somehow if you train to be violent or you train for violence, that you become violent, that you become one of those people. And it's absolutely not. You don't break your moral code when you learn this. The problem is people love stories, and they want a story behind. They don't want to believe that all I got to do is go up and just, if I want to take a guy out, all I have to do is when he's not looking, pull out a ball peen hammer and hit him in the back of the head. That's it. Violence is just that blunt and that easy,
Yeah.
And we see it all the time. What's interesting is when we see violence, you don't cheer. Like, you see something like a John Wick and it's fun to watch.
Right.
Okay. You watch something like Eastern Promises or The History of Violence, those two movies.
Yeah.
It's the real thing. There's nothing glorified about it. It's ugly. It's nasty. And it's just the only goal is for you to survive. Yeah. And that's it. But that's where the predators have a tremendous advantage on us. That's why the best information often comes from the worst parts of society. And that's why you want to study those guys, not because we're glorifying them, but because they live in an environment where violence is the currency. Therefore, they don't get into opinions. They don't get into anything other than
it's just what works.
Yeah. And when you learn that, it's interesting, because they have a very utilitarian approach to it. And it's pretty straightforward, pretty boring, but they're also very, very methodical about how.
No, I've seen, I'll link some of in the show notes. I'm going to link some of the videos, some of your YouTube stuff. But I've seen it at conferences, your speeches. He would interview like the I forget which gang he was in, MS-13 or one of them. And the dude's talking about like carving dudes up in prison. Like I would talk about like, making rice for dinner or something,
Yeah.
Dude. It's nuts.
Well, yeah. When you put it, what's interesting about when I have those talks, it's actually if you just understand that violence is the currency, like nothing, they have no power base without the credible threat of violence, and they have to have shown that at one point that they're capable of doing that.
Yeah.
And therefore, the way they use violence is very judicious. They can't afford to get it wrong. And so the reason there's useful information there is because what they do is universal on human beings, meaning it doesn't matter. They look at a 280-pound yoked shot caller the way they look at a 12-year-old girl as far as opportunities to put injury on somebody, meaning what they do is the biggest advantage that predators have over us is the way they look at the human body. They look at it all. They don't look at the differences of the human body. Meaning they don't look at a guy and go, oh my God, he's so much bigger than me, he's so much stronger than me, he's so much faster than me. They sit there and they go, oh, there's his eye, there's his throat, there's the knee, there's the, that's exactly how these guys look at everything. And when you sit there and you look at the similarities rather than the differences, it's a really powerful mind change, when you look at that.
Hold on. Let's take a step back because you're getting to the part that excites you and the meat of it. But we gotta let's baby step there. So the first thing you went back to, if I'm entering this world, right, and I'm like, okay, I realize that I need to train for violence. The first question you said to ask is understand why you are training, right? So what would be? I know there's not the answer for that. But what are the best answers you hear from people, like me who are like getting into this world?
It's a skill set that is really a right for everybody to have.
Right.
And unfortunately, the tool of violence has been stigmatized so much in society right now that the only people that have access to it are the predators.
Yeah.
And we've been told this lie that studying violence makes you violent.
Yeah.
And so it just puts us so behind the power curve. And the things that we do train, quote unquote, self-defense, all those other things put us 2 to 3 steps behind a real predator because of the way they think and the way they act. And we are just as capable of using violence, when our life is on the line in that justified situation where we're devoid of choice, facing imminent harm. And the biggest thing people have to start with, though, is when they're asking, is not only why am I training, but also I think most people have to say the reason they haven't trained up until that point. They'll give a variety of the reasons, but the real reason for most people is they're scared. And I don't mean in a
judgmental way, right?
Judgmental way. I just mean like,
I
hey,
agree.
It's an uncomfortable topic. Nobody wants to talk about it, especially when it comes to violence. Combat sports can be fun. You can have a community, but when you're training violence, there's no payoff. It's just survival.
It's not the same thing. Like, let me just okay. So, well, let me, because you get two. Why are you training, and why haven't you trained up to now? Right, which are great questions. For me, why are you training is simple. It's family, right? Like, if I didn't have family, I'd still probably train, but it's not. I don't think it would be as urgent for me. But like, I have 4 young kids and a wife, and like, I mean, dude, if God forbid, if some real shit went down 3 years ago, I wasn't prepared. I wouldn't have been able to do it. Now I am. I'm getting better and better and better. But 3 years ago, if something like BLM riots happened, I mean, shit, they were going down in Austin. And you know the story about that Lyft driver who was an army sergeant dropping someone off downtown, comes around the corner, like following, his GPS, and right into a protest. And some clown dude, someone had handed him an AK. He pointed at the guy, right? The driver could have been me. There's no other, that could have been me. What would I have done then? I might have been stitched up. Right. Like I didn't carry openly in my car at the time. I didn't, whatever. And so like that guy was in the army. He carried, pulled out, killed the guy. It ended up being fine, getting off. But like, if I can't protect my family, to me, man, that's not the most important job I have. It's in the top 3. And I better be able to actually do it. Right. But dude, the next question, I just had to face this the last 6 months. Why haven't I trained up to now? Or why haven't I trained effectively? Because like I now, I trained, after going to Bill's thing and realizing that the system I had wasn't going to work, and then started training with him and SIOC and your stuff. I carry 2 blades and a gun everywhere I go, right? And dude, it was super creepy and weird to start carrying a loaded pistol, like a loaded pistol on my body. Well, I had no idea how difficult emotionally that was going to be. Like I had to carry a cert gun for a week just to get used to carrying a pistol and to get over part of it was fear, no doubt. I don't want to discount that. But there was something else. It was like it was almost like a violating of a taboo, right? That like, and I'm good with a pistol. I'm definitely safe with it. Not good, like I'm a great shooter, but I mean, I'm very safe. I know what I'm doing. I have no issues. Like, I'll take gun out anywhere and shoot. I'm fine. But putting it on me and carrying it out, like in public, was really hard, dude, really hard. Like, I mean, I was afraid to go to, sheepdog classes or Bill's classes or whatever. I got over that fear, went to them. Okay, great. Man, but the next level to training SIOC with these guys, like training knife fighting with these dudes, man, is like, and these dudes do not fuck around. Like they're nice guys, but they're training you how to put knives in people's throats if the situation arises. And so that means you're putting aluminum knives in each other's throats.
You're right.
You're doing the exact motion. And dude, that is so... I was afraid at first. I got over the fear quickly to train. It was really... I'm still dealing with the fear. I don't know how to put this. The fear of having this power? I don't know how to say it. Do you know what I'm talking about, man? Or am I just right?
Yeah, no, you're actually nailing the one thing that very few people consider. A lot of people train like you're talking about, and they never actually think about what it would be like to actually do it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's wrong. And what you're doing is you're wrestling with the fact that now I am carrying multiple ways to accelerate trauma on somebody at a level that I never used to have. And there may be an opportunity, unfortunately, for me to have to do this. And I've got to be able to do it. And then I've got to be able to live with it. And most people don't understand. I mean, I remember the first time that I got in a really violent situation. Afterwards, what nobody ever told me was I puked. I was shaking uncontrollably and I won. I freaking won. You know, I took the guy out and nobody told me. And luckily, one of the guys was a really good friend of mine. He was a tough guy. He goes, "Oh no, that's normal, man."
Yeah.
He goes, "There's nothing wrong with you." He goes, "That's exactly, it's your body getting used to it. It's not in there." And people don't tell you stuff like that. You know, people don't tell you what it's like to actually do it. You know, my big problem with people, especially that teach tools all the time, is they do all this really cool shit, but they don't prep you for what that does to the human body and what you're going to end up with.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the things that we always do. The reason we talk about trauma all the time in the human body, and we talk about decrementing function, you know, what actually happens. Your brain has to go there ahead of time. Meaning, I know that if I do this to somebody and I'm successful, this is the result that I'm getting. I'm either going to shut down a sensory system of the human body, or I'm going to break a structure of the human body. And I have to understand what that does and how it works. And it's that idea. There's a case years ago of a guy who trained similar. It was a collie. It wasn't SIAC, but he was very good with knives, and he ended up getting attacked. He and his girlfriend got attacked by armed guys. He took out the first guy, ends up throwing the guy over. He's trying to shoot the guy who was trying to shoot him, and he literally ripped his throat out. Done it 1,000,000 times with his knife before, but he was never the same after, because he had never actually thought about it. He didn't prepare for all the blood. He didn't prepare for the noises that guy was going to make. He didn't understand the violence, meaning because he'd been training just movements, and he wasn't really training for violence. And so what's really important is when you're talking to people about this stuff, you have to give them the mental picture, what's going on. That's why I show what a wrecked eye looks like. I show what wrecked human bodies look like that people have had. And the reason I do that, it's not to be gratuitous. It's not to shock people, but this is what you're going for. It's not, you know, I'm not going to gouge the eye. I am blinding the man. There's 3 different ways I could do that. I can tear it, I can puncture it, and I can impact it. You know, and one of those things, blunt impact. Those are 3 different ways that I can destroy the eye. And I know that now, you know, and those are part of me. And I understand what each one of those does. And the reason you have all this stuff, like when you're going through the training, you have to be talking to yourself mentally the whole time of what is the result? What am I going for? What should it look like? Did I get what I want? You know, you should be mentally exhausted by the end of a training session. You know, the way we look at it, we go first.
I'm not kidding. I come home from my PSYOP training and I have to take naps.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
it's exactly how it should be.
It's not physically exhausting. I mean, come on, man. Like I do hour-long training, like high intensity roles with people like Tim fucking Kennedy and Sean J. Riviera. Like that's not, knife fighting is not anywhere approaching that level of exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting.
Yeah.
The last one, man, we did some pretty serious, I forget what it's called, but where you're pushing into the top, you're trying to get people to walk back. Like, you're not like run, there's a name for it, but dude, that was the first time I think I really had the visceral feeling, holy fuck, if I have to do this for real, I am going to carve a dude up, and it's going to be disastrous and messy. And like, this is no joke, man. This is not ceremonial. This is not a game. These are not, I mean, the knives I carry are dangerous as hell, man. I think the Northman headhunt, I carry one Northman, one headhunter. Those things are no joke, dude. And it was like, I came home and took, I swear to God, a 90-minute nap. I was destroyed, emotional.
Yeah.
Like, how weird is that? I felt so weird about it, but like, you're telling me this is normal.
Yeah. Oh no, it's really normal because you're actually viscerally doing this. You're in your mind. It's real.
Right.
Yeah, it's slow, deliberate. You're going in there, but now you're starting to realize the other thing too that you realize, especially, when I talk about tools, not only do you have to, train the tools correctly, which you're doing, absolutely, but you also have to think about, okay, what are the results if I choose to use this tool on somebody? Right. And what I mean by that is you have to think about how it looks at the end, meaning if you have a situation like that guy that shot the guy with the AK,
right?
Pretty clean. Everybody gets that one. What if though the guy had the AK and this guy closed distance and used a knife and carved him up?
Yeah.
What's really weird is the way the law looks at it. It has nothing. It's the same exact threat, the same exact thing. But the problem is you're going to be covered in blood. He's going to be covered in blood. It's going to be nasty. You're going to have a blade that's dripping. And that's what the police are going to see when they show up. That's the view. So that's the other thing you got to think about. Go, hey, listen, I love knives, and damn it, if I need it, I'm going to use it. But I have no illusions about what that might do when I have to actually explain myself when he comes in. There's just something about it. It's so crazy. They will allow you to empty a firearm into somebody, no problem whatsoever. It's seen as clean. Using knives, it can get dicey. And this is the kind of stuff that I love to talk about with people, because they don't think about this stuff. They just train.
Not at all.
And then so I bring on guys like my buddy Varg Freeborn, who did like 5 years because he used a little Boy Scout blade against a guy way bigger than him, way older than him, who had been tracking him, stabbed him 13 times, saved his own life, and yet ended up, because he had a shitty lawyer, he ended up doing 5 years.
Yeah, because I'll tell you why. Because I'm still close enough to being whatever you want to call it, a violence version, to know that hearing the term, well, he stabbed him 13 times, just automatically seems gratuitous to me, right? Now that I've been knife training, if you don't hit the switches or timers, as the SIAC guys call it, if you don't hit the vitals, I can stab a motherfucker 13 times in his leg and he can still kill the hell out of me, man. 13 stabbing doesn't mean shit. You can survive 13 stabs easily if none of them are well placed. Easily.
Yeah. I show a video in my class of prison killing, and the guy was stabbed 67 times. It was determined by the medical examiner that only 2 were lethal. And so, with medical attention, he probably could have survived the other 65.
Yeah.
The human body is incredibly resilient when you don't get into those vital areas.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So it's both fear of training and then fear of the power.
Fear of living with it.
Yeah.
Fear of living with it. It's a huge responsibility. I mean, listen, I can carry, I have another business where I have unlimited weapons. I can get anything built for me. I've got class 3. We have manufacturer's license.
Yeah.
I'm pretty judicious in when I choose to carry and when I don't. Yeah. And of course, also the reality is when I travel, it's very rare that I can take a weapon with me. So I don't rely on tools. I love them. They're great. But also every time I've had an issue, or a potential issue, it usually is in a place where I can't carry tools.
Yeah.
And so, and you have to just be prepared for that. So the preparation, what's so interesting about learning violence, and this is it should be a huge motivation for people. What my approach to it is, I immerse people in it right away. I start teaching them how to tear apart the human body. I start giving different sight pictures, different tools. It's almost like they're learning dry firing right away. It's a dry fire, using their human body to do it. And the reason I do that is because I want them completely, just like firearms. Imagine if the way you learn firearms the first time is you got a safety brief. The guy gives you the safety brief, sits there, and you're going to use airsoft. So we'll make it tomorrow. It's going to be airsoft, but you don't get any range time. You don't do anything. He takes you right to the kill house. The opposition force is in there waiting for you.
Yeah.
He opens the door, kicks you in, goes, good luck. And they're shooting at you.
Yeah, that's not good.
And it's like, and you wouldn't do anything. Why do you think they sit there? Nothing is more chaotic than a gunfight. And yet, how do they train? They train first slow, accurate, correct. Getting everything in, getting the weapon. Nothing's coming at you. You don't have to worry about any of that, even though we know in a real gunfight, people are shooting. You know, but why do they train that way? They train that way because you have to be outwardly focused on what you can do, and you have to get control of the tool first.
Yeah.
And my big problem with the way a lot of people learn, you know, self-protection, self-defense, when it gets serious, everybody starts in every serious aspect of lethality, other than hand-to-hand or combatives. The majority of people start out slow, accurate, correct. That's it. And you earn speed. You know, in the special operations community, they talk about when they train, they talk about crawl, walk, run.
Okay.
And yet, the scenario I gave you about getting kicked into the shoot house and being shot at is essentially how most people learn some form of combat sport or self-defense. They're immediately attacked. They're immediately sit there. They're learning how to block. They're coming in. They don't zero in their own human machine. And they're taught nothing other than, shit, this is scary.
Yeah.
And I'm getting my ass kicked. And they don't understand. They don't train the way predators train. And so my whole approach was, when I learned this, what's interesting is once you learn justified lethal force, which is what we train, what's really interesting is everything else is easy. And number two, you make much better decisions in your life. Meaning, when you know what it takes, what the kind of intent you have to have and what you would have to do to another human to survive a truly violent situation where you're devoid of choice, you then sit there and you start looking at the way you conduct your life and you go, where am I taking unnecessary risks? And behavioral change is what happens. And to me, that's the most important part with everybody. The punching, the kicking, the striking, that's easy stuff. And most people, it's boring, meaning I taught a woman, she just, in fact, it's so strange. She just showed up to an advanced class about 2 or 3 weeks ago out of the blue. She's in my book. Her name is Bridget. This woman was completely traumatized, was attacked prior to coming to my class the first time,
Sure.
Had therapy dog, German Shepherd, the whole deal. She took multiple breaks in the class. She was shaking. It was all coming back to her. She goes, months later, you know, it was one of those students that you have and you say, you know what, I hope to God this woman gets a pass the rest of her life. You know, she needs it.
Right.
And yet, of course, you know, I never know who it is, but statistically somebody in one of my classes is going to have to use the information. I get a report from her husband, the police report. She had been attacked. She was at a Lowe's putting in flats of some flowers that she was going to put in. Dog was put in the cage first, and she said as she's putting in the second flat of flowers, she hears from behind, "Do you need help?" And then it hit her. She knew right away. She, everything kinesthetically, back of her neck, everything went. She goes, "It's happening again." And sure enough, the guy lifts her off her feet. She's got concealed carry, but it's on her thigh. She knows she can't get to it. And her first thought is, okay, it's not my hand, it's not my primary weapon. But here's a woman who, like I said, could barely get through the class. And yet her first thought was, well, I still have my forearm and I know I can get to his throat. And so as he lifted her up, she turned right into him and just put everything right into the throat and crushed his throat. He goes down. As he's going down, she sees the top of his knee and she jumps on top of his knee, you know, basically, and puts all of her weight and snaps and flamingos his knee and stands. Now, this is a woman who's about 140 pounds, a middle-aged woman, not,
Right.
you know, not some CrossFit athlete or anything like that. She's a very average middle-aged woman. And the guy goes down and, you know, he's sitting there, you know, on the thing. He's hardly breathing. The cops come out, or the security guys come out, and the guy points at her and he goes, she attacked me. And, you know, she thought to herself, she goes, well, he's pretty accurate on that. She goes, I kind of did, but it was, what was really interesting were the police show up and they could not fathom why she didn't take out her gun and shoot the guy at the end. Meaning she would have been totally justified killing the guy. And she goes, I didn't need to. I could tell that he was no longer a threat at this point. He couldn't move. He was hobbled. He couldn't get to any tools or anything like that. And I had him. And she goes, there was no need for me to continue. So that's why I try to tell people is when you understand violence and you understand the tool and how to use it. Worst case scenario, you're not going to cross your moral code. You're not going to go beyond. You don't get turned into some, predator or some asocial, criminal. What you do is you put yourself on par with the worst of the worst. So at least they don't have an advantage on you when it comes to attempt, because you understand you have to get into it right away. And this woman is a perfect example of that. Now, listen, if we put her in the ring with this guy and everybody knew what was going on, we all
a different story.
Yeah, I know that would end up. And that's just it. Training for violence is very different than training for competition. Meaning,
Sure.
they don't do it. What's interesting though is everybody can use the tool of violence. You have the opportunity to use it. And the great thing about people understanding that is predators, because they don't fear you, oftentimes bring a vulnerable part of their body very close to you. And that is usually your one chance to get out of that really bad situation. Now, going back to her, she was kicking herself. She was kicking herself about her situational awareness, her assumption that she was safe, the fact that they had offered to take because she had bought a lot of stuff, and they had offered to take her out to the car, and she didn't want to
buy anybody out.
Yeah, that whole thing. There's these social things that we do, and that's what she really was mad about. And so that's the big thing. That what I love to do is I'd love to take people through violence training, get them through, and get them to understand how the tool of violence works, all the parameters on both sides of what's avoidable and what's not avoidable. And then the best feedback that I get from people is, hey, Tim, this happened this weekend. The old me would have reacted this way.
Yeah.
But I saw where this was going, and I was able to get myself and my family out of there without an incident, because I recognized potentiality for violence. And to me, that's the greatest gift you can give somebody, because this is stuff, it's when you use the tool of violence, it literally is for survival. That's all you get out of it. I try to describe it for people, what is the value of learning violence? Well, I would say it's the same reason that all parents train their kids to swim. When you ask parents, you go, oh, you train your kid to swim. Yeah. Oh, so you want to be like Michael Phelps? I'm like, no, I don't want him to drown. You go, great. And I tell people, I go, okay, so taking that analogy and then bringing it into violence, what I do in my class all the time is I go, hey, how many people in class know how to swim? And the vast majority of people raise their hands. And then I say, okay, of all the people, keep your hands up. Of all the people that know how to swim, have you ever had to swim for your life? And then hands come down, a couple stay up. Mine stays up because I've had to swim for my life twice. And I say to people, okay, of those of you that, had to swim for your life, would you ever want to experience that again? All hands come down. And that's violence. Real violence is something that you survive, and you hope to God, no matter how you performed, and a lot of people perform absolutely heroically, they never want it to come into their life again, for all the reasons that you and I just talked about, and so I guess the message so far is, when you're making these decisions on here, you're probably thinking in physical terms. And yes, there's physical training, but that's the easy part. The hard part is what we're talking about. Why are you doing it? Are you really going to put the time in to prepare your brain to think about this? What are the benefits of this? Well, the benefits are, if you do take that dive and you go in, you're going to minimize the chance of violence coming in your life. You're going to create a situation where you're not going to be paranoid. You're going to be smart, and you're just going to sit there and go, hey, there are just certain things I don't do anymore. For me, I live in Vegas for years. When I was a single guy, I had a lot of fun, did a lot of things that now I just wouldn't do, because things have changed radically. Everybody talks about COVID and what happened. I saw it happen here in Vegas in 2008 at the crash. We had home invasions like you wouldn't believe. We had desperate people that were losing their houses. It was ugly as hell. And it happened like that. I mean, we went from a super affluent town to everybody lost their money. And, it quickly turned ugly in some of the nicest neighborhoods. I mean, they turned really quick. So I had a precursor of that back then. And what was interesting was stuff was happening in the U.S., and we saw it during COVID, that I only thought would happen in a lot of the third world countries that I used to train in. Yeah. I'd see things happen, like the fact that police not responding to calls, that 911 dispatcher telling a woman whose children are in the car and they're being surrounded by a mob that, sorry, ma'am, nobody's coming. This is all this unthinkable. So that only happens in other countries. It doesn't happen in our country. Right. And yet we saw multiple incidents like that, and very few people were prepared for that, Yeah. So getting the training and understanding the potentiality for violence is you have to understand how quickly things turn, and that's the rapid, a violent act happens rapidly out of nowhere. And it catches you unaware if you are one of those people that is not really paying attention to their surroundings and where you're going. And that does not mean you have to be paranoid. It just means you have to be aware. And you have to understand. And also, we're entering a time now in the economy where desperation is going to sit. I'm seeing it already. People don't have the money to do things. They say most of the savings for Americans is absolutely gone. People are just getting back to work, and even that's going, kind of haphazardly. And you're seeing things. I see it amongst my client list. I see people just reacting differently to things. They can't afford certain things anymore. On a much larger scale than I've ever seen it before. And so I'm thinking we're a couple of months away from a real crunch where things are going to get a lot tighter for people. And they're saying that supply chains are going to tighten up. There's going to be food stuffs. There's going to be some problems. And this isn't some crazy prepper dream. This is a reality. I told you that I was at an event, really well-known guy who has a high net worth individuals, all 1%ers, been doing training for him for years. Mm-hmm. And this year, I swear to God, I thought I was at a prepper event. They are preparing these people. These are not knuckleheads. These are people that are very smart. They have a lot of, success, and yet they're all making sure that they have houses that have generators, that they have weapons, that they're in isolated areas, places they can protect. They're building compounds, and they're preparing for at least 8 years. 8 years of situations where they think there's going to be some societal breakdowns, where it's at. And if it doesn't happen, they're still in great shape. There's no downside to them thinking that way. But the reason I bring that up is, if that group is thinking about it, then it's worth the rest of us considering, okay, how do we look to our situations, where our vulnerabilities, and when we look to training ourselves, do we make sure that we don't just do the physical aspects of it, that we actually think about when we'd ever use this information and how we'd use it and what the results would be? And that, to me, is the harder part of the equation than the physical training. Because the physical training, once you get into it, there's a couple of things that happen, especially when you treat pure violence to people. The part is they're not uncomfortable doing the violence. What they're uncomfortable with is they're actually pretty good at it. They actually don't require a lot of training to know how to crush a throat correctly, how to take an eye correctly. Once you show them, it's kind of built into us in our DNA. We kind of get it, and that's more disturbing to people, is the fact that, oh, this isn't actually hard. Actually, I kind of know how to do this. It's just doing manual labor in a very specific way on the human body. Yeah. And what's the real challenge is putting into the right context of, when would I ever need this information? When do I train it? How do I talk to my family about this? Because that's the other thing. I think one of the disconnects is, a lot of times the provider, the father, will go and seek training, and there's real resistance in the rest of the family to look at the subject, or they think it's almost like a fear-mongering thing. And it's well-meaning. A lot of times the moms, you really have to get your spouse on board with what you're doing. She doesn't have to necessarily train the way you train, but she has to be open to the ideas, of potentiality for violence and what would happen, and at least think about things. What would you do if you all of a sudden came around the corner and there's a mob, in your car? What are the kids? What do you want the kids to do? Where are you? You have to start thinking about these types of issues. And this has nothing to do with, the fun part of choking somebody out or winning competition. And that is awesome, fun, and great. This stuff is hard to think about. It's deliberate thinking that you have to put about, which is really coming to your right to protect yourself and your family. And what does that mean to you?
All right. So why are you training? Why haven't you trained up to now? And then so based off what you just said, the third would be like, what is it going to be like to utilize this training?
Yeah. And you have to, then your training methodologies you have to look at. You have to look
Right.
at, okay, if I'm training for real injury to the human body, how do I do that? Well, you want to be able to go into the areas that are most vulnerable. So then, you have to modify your training. And what do? Well, if you don't provide a target on the human body, an area for you to focus on and to actually put the effort into, you're just hitting non-specific areas of the body. You can hit them pretty hard, but you're not going to necessarily get a result.
Yeah.
You're probably just going to hurt somebody or piss them off. Punching them to the pec is,
Yeah.
much different than punching somebody to the throat.
Yeah.
So the idea behind this is you have to come up with a training methodology that isn't competitive. It's actually cooperative, meaning you have to have a training partner that allows you to go in these really dangerous areas of the human body to put any sort of pressure on.
Yeah.
And the agreement is you're not going to go full speed. You are going to touch and push through, and it's going to be at a decent rate, but you're not going to go full speed. You're not going to actually do it. And the agreement for him or her is they're going to replicate and model for you what success looks like, what an injury to that area looks like. And the good thing about that is we have tons and tons of great, violence videos that show people getting struck to these areas and what the response is. So it's not opinion. The reason that the big thing that we did differently years ago in the early 90s was we put everything into the category of sports injury data. And the reason we went to sports injury data is because that's all the data where humans collide with humans and humans collide with the planet. And those are forces that you and I can replicate.
Yeah.
Oftentimes in other arts, and there's lots of fantasy strikes, and you can break this or you can do that. It has nothing to do with reality. I mean, if you look at, say, and this isn't picking on Taekwondo, but if you look at like a Taekwondo punch, they will sit there. And one of the first things I learned when I was doing some of the Korean arts was it was 2 punches to the middle and then 1 high. If you do that to the human body, if you strike twice, that 3rd punch is going to be full air because the guy's going to be bent over at that point. So we do a lot of drills in a lot of the combat sports and martial arts that don't replicate real violence in response to violence. And so what you need to do is you need to make sure that every time you're doing something, like the SIAC guys talk, is it a timer or a switch that you're doing on somebody? I really like that terminology. We used to go, are you taking somebody to non-functional? Are you decrementing function on somebody? That's what you want to do. Every time you put your hands on somebody, when your life is on the line, you want to make sure that you are taking away their sensory system or breaking structure on that human body. So stuff no longer works on that person during that time.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about hitting people with trauma, and we've all experienced it, it's a response that takes the brain out of the equation. And if you've ever touched a hot stove, your hand automatically comes off. It doesn't sit there and start smoking and you're looking at it and you go, oh shit, I'm burning, I better pull it off. What happens is the afferent nervous system kicks in. The stimulus is way ramped up. So it doesn't go all the way to the brain to tell it, hey, you're burning. What it does is it sends another message down there saying, move it. And it moves the hand. And by the time the hand's off, the brain then goes, oh shit, I was burned at that point. What we do is or stepping on a sharp object, like a pin or something like that. Your foot automatically comes up. There's no process where the brain is involved in that. Those are called, spinal reflex reactions, basically. And so what you want to do is you want to put enough trauma in the human body where you take the human brain out of the equation, where it doesn't matter how intent they are and hurting you or doing, they have to respond to the trauma. And at that time, it disengages the brain. And that's what predators understand. Real street predators understand how to do that to somebody. And it's a very simple skill set, though. That's the good news. The good news is destruction is really easy to learn. The bad news is it's a lot of mental work, and for
it's hard. The mental work's harder than the physical. That's been my experience.
Yeah. Well, because you have to wrap your head around what you're doing. And also, just like shooting, you have to sit there and really, if I'm putting, say, my ulna bone and I want to get it in that 1 square inch right below the Adam's apple as I'm coming up into the strike, I've got to sit there and make sure that when I touch the area of the human body, is it exactly where I want it? That 1 square inch on the 1 square inch, and going slow and deliberate and making sure that you get those types of results each and every time. So like I said, your mental focus to do that is draining. It really comes down to that idea of, they use the term now, deep practice. We were doing it years ago. We were just calling it, slow deliberate training. But we didn't realize that, you can only do that, quality wise, you can only do it for about 3 hours to 5 hours. Yeah. And you got to take breaks in between that, but you will be mentally exhausted. And that's really interesting. Now, what's interesting about that is the slow deliberate training. The correlation to full speed is huge. Yeah. Because the brain doesn't know the difference between slow and fast. When you go slow, accurate, and correct, that doesn't mean weak. It just means slow, accurate, and correct. It gives your body time to say, what do you want me to do when you need this information? Well, I want you to step here. I want to make sure that we're penetrated into this guy with my body weight. I want to make sure that the 1 square inch of whatever tool I'm using is on that vulnerable square inch of them. And I want to make sure I'm stepping all the way through to put all of my body weight into the shot. And so you have the time to understand that. And what's really interesting is the leading to fast execution, and where that comes into practice, where people sit there's multiple different ways. The guy that wrote the talent code, Daniel Coyle, he did a really good job of identifying a lot of different disciplines that use this methodology. Everything from Marymount School of Music, which did Yo-Yo Ma and a lot of Exact Perlman and a lot of other just amazing musicians. They have a training methodology where they take a piece of music, they mix it all up, and then they take a just one line of it and they play it. And the rule is that if anybody walking by can pick out the piece of music that you're playing it too fast. And yet these guys are lightning fast when they're using, their strings at that point. Yeah. But what it does is it sinks in, it gets that myelin and everything. So all we do is, when I have new students, this is all we do. We just crawl, walk, run. And the majority of time is in the crawl phase. I'll usually get them up to walk once in a while. And then once in a while, after they train for a while, we might do a full run. But it depends on a lot of abilities. But if there's any degradation in accuracy and correctness, you drop down each time, and that's my biggest problem is with a lot of this stuff is I don't believe that when you're training for violence, I believe there's a huge problem in the industry where everybody doesn't lay down that foundation first. They jump right in, they add speed way too early. They teach people to pull punches. They teach people, they don't understand body weight delivery. They don't understand real injury to the human body. What they're trying to do is they're trying to look cool, and oftentimes the speed that you see, this crazy shit that you see, it's really fear. What it's saying is, hey, whatever I just did, I don't believe it works. So I'm going to do another thing really fast and really fast and really fast. And it's just fear-based on it. Whereas when you talk to these predators, when you talk to the guys and you talk to prison shot callers, guys that really kill for a living, they talk about just taking their time. They know what they just did got a result, and now they're going to set up for the next thing as they finish this person off. Yeah. And that's really what it is. Injury buys you time. And when you understand that and how to exploit that, training, it's really just, methodical. And you understand, you look, if you don't get the trauma response for the area that you went after, you didn't miss, you missed. Yeah. And you don't freak out about it. You just get right into it right away. Go, okay, I didn't get what I wanted on that. I got to zone in on this, and I pick another target and I go to it. But it's a great feedback loop when you train your brain correctly and you understand crawl, walk, run, and you take the time to lay down that foundation. If you lay down the foundation at the slower, accurate, and correct levels, when you execute full speed, it's just amazing. You know, I'll tell guys all the time, like I see it all the time, like gun disarms and stuff like this. Like the cops, somebody tries to grab their gun and they show them like pushing the chest and push the chest away to gain distance. And, you know, we used to laugh at that. We just have them go up a couple inches and go right into the throat right away. Yeah. It's the thing. And then they'll say some idiotic shit like, well, you can't target it under pressure, you know, gross motor neuron. Bullshit. You do what you train.
Bullshit. I mean, I know that.
But that's prevalent. That's what a lot of guys in the industry will come back and say when we're in training. Well, you know, they freak out about it.
If you can't target under pressure, it means you have terrible training. Even I say that.
That's just
doing jiu-jitsu.
Very few people in Muay Thai. Very few people, you know, target. It's rare, and those that do, you know, are the ones. If you look at if you look at Tyson's one-man show, right, he talks about a training method, a training drill that he used to do. It's custom motto. And what is he doing? He's calling out liver, spleen, chin, boom. It's targets that he's going after. He knows exactly where he's going on the human body each and every time. That's like that.
That's all boxing is. It's targeting under pressure. You're not throwing wild haymakers.
Yeah. And that's just it. And you do it, but you lay it down slow, accurate, and deliberate at first. It's not, the misnomer is people think you always stay in this slow training. That's not it at all. It would be the same thing with your firearms. Of course, you don't sit there and stay with, you know, one deliberate dry fire after another. Yeah. You continue to dry fire though? Yes, you do. And, oh, by the way, of all the people that have used the information over the years, and some of my people that are, you know, instructors of mine and everything, nobody has ever come back after 30 years of doing this and using it for violence and saying, you know what? I'm not training fast enough. I got to train faster. They all come back and they all say the same thing. Damn it. I've been training too fast on the mats. I didn't get my first target. I was off. I had to get right into him right away. And it's because I'm too fucking sloppy because I'm going too fast. And that's each and every time, you know, you get that. Same thing with guys in shooting, man. I mean, one thing that really struck me was, I was talking to a sheriff, when I was doing my consultations with the prison systems. And so I was talking to a guy from the sheriff's department, and he was listening to me talk, and he came up, he goes, now everything makes sense to me. And I go, what? He goes, we had a guy come out, and he was a former Delta shooter. And he came out to train the sheriff's, their SWAT team when they came out, the LA SWAT. And LA Sheriff SWAT, which is very different than LAPD. He goes, it was my day to open the range. He goes, so I open it up at 6. He goes, the class isn't till 10. 6 o'clock, there's the guy waiting for me to open up the instructor. He goes, he spends the first hour dry firing, just dry firing. Then second hour, he starts putting in some rounds, you know, little by little, you know, just little slow, deliberate stuff, getting everything the way he wanted. For the last hour before the guys show up, he starts doing some movement, some training, and then he does a couple full speed runs at the end that were, the guy said, there's just freaking spectacular. He said, but I saw him lay down all this slow, deliberate training all the time. And he told me after, because I asked him about it, he goes, why do you do it? He goes, this is my routine each and every time I come in. He goes, I want to make sure if there's anything that I'm off on, I'm going slow enough to catch it right now. He goes, because I'm going to have to be training at a much higher rate with you guys. And I want to make sure that I've laid everything down foundationally for that. And the same thing, like I had buddies of mine that trained with me and they used to kind of laugh. They didn't know much about my training. They were Aussie SAS guys, and they came out and trained with me in Sydney, and they were knuckleheads. They were funny as hell. But they didn't take it as serious. Right. They then came to another course where they were instructing some close-in shooting, but they didn't really know how to handle a class. And so I jumped in and kind of helped them with some of my methodologies and got them past it. And they looked. Well, then they went back over to the sandbox, and they called me up and they said, hey man, we just got to apologize for being such dickheads in Sydney and screwing around with you. They said, we've been out here the whole time training, and 80% of the time we've been in the crawl stage, and they're doing full on, house in there. Then about probably, 15% of the time we're at walk. Only 5% of the time were we doing full speed, training out that.
Right.
Anytime targeting or accuracy suffered, we dropped back on speed right away. And we said, you just hit us. That's exactly what you were doing with all those people.
Yeah.
And so it's a proven. It's not something I came up with. It's nothing. It's just methodologies that, we used over the years, and just found that when you're training to decrement the function of a human being, you have to make sure that you're going into areas to get a result. And all those areas are highly vulnerable. And so there's training methodologies you have to use to, compensate for that, and not degrade, the idea of where you really need to go when your life's on the line.
Yeah. All right. So if I'm coming out of this hour now, I understand why I'm training, why I haven't trained. Like, I get, okay, like, I've got to be serious about violence. Like, violence is real. This is how it works. I got to understand the impacts it's going to have, all that kind of stuff. Is there any other sort of, like, we're talking about beginners getting in, right? Is there any other sort of mindset shift, like a major mindset shift? You're like, okay, you think this, but you're going to need to start thinking this to be effective at violence. Protecting your family, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the homework I give everybody. And it's just the thing that most people find extremely difficult, but this will give you the greatest advantage when it comes to violence. When you see an act of violence in the future, for the next 30 days, when anybody that's watching this, the challenge is, when you see an act of violence, if it's in movies, if it's on, internet,
right,
whatever, I want you to just look at the act of violence and look at it from the perspective of who's winning. Whoever is successful using the tool of violence, find out at what point in the event did everything change in that person's favor. And what did they do after they had success? And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, you're not condoning the act. Most of what you're going to watch is criminal.
Right.
You're not, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your brain to look at what works when it comes to violence. The hardest thing for people to understand when they're looking at violence is there is absolutely nothing to be gained by looking at it from the victim's perspective. And because people try to, I'd undo this or I'd undo that. That's exactly the wrong way to look at it. You'll be 2 steps behind each and every time. They did a study. I want to say it's been at least 15 years now. And I think it was at Kern State, where psychiatrists went in and they showed acts of violence, and they showed self-defense techniques to all these alpha, predators, shot callers and stuff. And what was interesting is not one of them saw themselves from the victim's perspective ever. They would look at it and they would say, okay, yeah, that guy did good work. And then the real, the real, true predators among them would then improve upon it. They would sit there and go, yeah, he did that, but I would have done it this way. And then I would have added this, and then I would have done that. It never, ever was in their mind that they would ever be on the receiving end of violence. Yeah. That they were the ones doing it. Now, what does that do? It inoculates your brain from putting yourself behind the power curve when you look at violence. It's probably one of the most challenging things for people, because why? You're going to want to empathize with the victim.
Yeah.
Yeah. You think you want to be a good person, and yet what you can do is you can still be a good person, but you got to protect yourself on how you view violence, and you always have to see it from the winning perspective.
That's true. No, that is one of the good things about MMA and jiu-jitsu, is that I'm always like you learn that quickly, right? Like, if you think of yourself on the submission end, then you get submitted. Like, that's, like, you may have to tap. That's fine. It happens. But, like, you don't ever think of, you're not going in even if I'm going against someone, like when I roll a 10K, he's a lot better than me. Like there's just no debate about that. But like I can still win for me. You know, I can go the whole round without being submitted, which is a major win for me with him. If I could hold him off for a round, that's worlds for me, you know? Like if I can set up a submission on him, right? That's huge, right? Like I set up a heel hook on Paulo, who's like my instructor the other day. I didn't finish it, of course, but I like it. For me to set up a 6th-degree black belt with a submission is like, just saying you're going to get to where I could potentially finish is huge. And that's a win, right? So I'm totally with you on that. And dude, also, I do get a lot of people come in like, oh, boy, I can just tell you with experience, the more effective I've gotten at administering violence, the less violent I've become. Like, and I just a clear straight line. Like, I am so much less likely to get into a fight or any nonsense like that now. And I'm like pretty good at violence now. And like, at least relative to when I was not good at it, like, that's when I was actually dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, like to the extent that I'm dangerous, but that's when I was. Like,
dangerous to yourself
too. Yeah, right.
Yourself.
To everybody.
Yeah.
Like,
you have illusions about violence. You have illusions about the way it's going to hand out. And going back to what you said too, some of the best guys I've worked with ever have all been combat sport athletes. For that very reason, they already get it. They already understand about that mindset. They just haven't applied it to violence. You know,
you just got to go that next step. Yeah.
Yeah. You go from
throw it out.
The same move that they go to submit somebody, we now are going to make it a joint break. Yeah. You know, we're going to take away the functioning of that part of the body and stuff to save their life. Yeah. And and combat sport athletes just mentally are just easy to work with. You know, they get it. They understand. So again, it's just this is a very specific tool for a very specific objective. You know, it's not something, it's the equivalent of, like I think we used to say, dynamite can open your car door, but it's probably not the best tool to do that, and like, this is a tool that's just very, it has very little use unless you truly need it. And if you truly need it, it's the most valuable tool you ever have. Yeah.
So if someone wants to dive, if someone's listening to this, like, I need to learn more, like, where do they go for you? If they want to dive into your world, where would you tell them to start?
Easiest way to go is they can do a deep dive in my YouTube channel. It's super easy. If they want a written thing, if they like this conversation, they really want to go in depth. My book, and it's on audiobook too, When Violence is the Answer, really covers this in depth. And those would be the two easiest areas for them to jump into.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. Like, is it a joy as always?
You got it, bro.
I know it's funny, right? Oh, talking about violence is always a joy. It actually is. It's fun. No, it's great, man. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You got it, brother.